votes to record. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning of Monday, we're looking at databases. And so we're continuing forward with databases now. And so, question you may have is, what is a database? And so this will actually take you to a link to a database. And what you'll see here is a link to SharePoint. I shared a PowerPoint with you. If you can sign in with your Maricopa information, your MEID and password. I'll demonstrate that here just because. And there's some I think I added audio to these as well. So you could go through that PowerPoint as well on databases. But if you, for some reason, have issues logging into your subscription, again, the same PowerPoint is right here. So you can always download it. So please don't email me telling me that you can't access the PowerPoint at all, because you have two options here to do so, unless both options don't work. So, okay. But that's there just it's supplemental, and also so you can review again, because there is a quiz involved with the databases. It's just a short understanding the basics of a database. This video from Mr. Ford's class is also in regards to database measure systems and goes over some of these basics as well. And again, you can learn from GCF Learn Free, which you've seen as supplemental material several times throughout this course so far. But they go over in great, I won't say great detail, because it's not extensive detail, but it is a great introductory and supplemental instruction and intermediate instruction as well, in my opinion, for Microsoft Access and how to use it. They have videos, examples galore, images to help you follow along through, and multiple lessons as well. So it's a great source for learning. They have a lot of things on there besides just the Microsoft Office application stuff, as I've shown before. So I had an example of that even with the creating of a resume. And they have like job interview suggestions. They have how to make a website, which we'll get to later in this course as well. They even have some stuff on languages. So great source for learning. But anyway, and then there are other free open source databases that can be utilized. Microsoft Access is the one that's used mainly in business, especially in-house business. And the purpose of that is because they already purchased Office for Business or Office Professional. And so there's no use of saying, hey, let's go use this other database system when they have one right there in-house. You may hear tales for some people that, in my opinion, they're just blinded by what they think society should be. But they think that some people think that Access is not used by businesses, or they say, oh, well, it only can be used for a local business or a small business. It can't be used on a wide scale. There are companies such as United Health that uses Microsoft Access internally. So yes, in the regards of only can be used for small use or in-house use, but they also create databases and packages to send to their clients across the world, so they can have on their house, and they create different scripts for them to use for their company or their subsidiaries. So the idea that Access cannot be used on a global scale is it's hodgepodge. It's just people's way of thinking, and being on my mind, it's being small-minded about it. But that's just also they don't know any difference, because there are larger database. There are other database softwares that are used on a large scale, such as Oracle. Some of you may have heard of Oracle. Some of you may have heard of like MySQL Server, or may have heard of Microsoft Azure, and tons of other services as well. So there are a lot, and there's some that are becoming more and more popular. But at this point in time, for this course, we will be looking at access, and so that's what I'm going to teach you. So, what is a database? We mentioned it earlier. So, a database is honestly a collection of data, and a collection of data a collection of related data will become information. And so, when you have information together, it becomes a record. And for a record, you could think of it as if everyone gave me their license in this class, we had a stack of them. Each one of those licenses would be a record because on that license is information that's all related together, and information being data that's related um, about a single data point. So we could call that collection of licenses a collection of records, and a collection of records would be a table. And so whenever we have a database, what we do is we set up, okay, what data do I want to get from people? What is it that I'm trying to look at? For instance, if I want to know, I just want to know basic information about people's license from people's licenses. I can take everyone's license and go through, and there's certain things that will be on there, like the name, the address, um, the license number, the state, the date of birth, the sex, the like height, the weight, um, eye color, and things like that. Each one of those would be a different category, but they will all be on all of our licenses. And so that would be known as a field. I believe I mentioned that to you all before, that a field would be is a term we use, but sometimes people call them categories, or they think of them as just their column headers, um, which will also work. The other thing about a database is that it can be a collection of those tables. For instance, so say I have a table that has the collection of all of our licenses. Well, I could have another table that has a collection of all of our social security information. I could have another table that has a collection of our voter registration information. Well, how would I be able to connect those? Well, based off of the licensing number, I could connect that to a social security number. And then from the social security number, I could use that to look at voter registration information, or use the license number to look at voter registration information. So there's a way for me to connect all of these tables together. And when I have these tables, a collection of these tables, that's how I get a database, and it becomes what's known as a relational database. And it's a relational database because each part of the data, each table within a database, and each part of the table relates to one another. Okay. Um, so because they're a relational database, obviously there would be unrelational databases. But we will focus on relational databases. And if you ever look at databases in your life, you're most likely going to be looking at a relational database, because why would you want to look at data that's unrelated to each other? Most people study that or have that just so that you can store data to have it stored, and then later on look for things that can make them relatable within some kind of study. But for the most part, people just look at relational databases. So just from the jump, are there any questions about the things that I said? We're gonna look more in detail about these tables and things on the tables. So any questions? Okay. Database objects. So this is just an overview of objects within a database. So depending on the software you're using, they may use different names for some of these objects, but a lot of them will be the same. In most cases, we'll have these four objects. There are other objects that occur though, as I mentioned, but these are the four that are most common, and they're the ones that we're going to utilize because we're using Microsoft Access. And so the first object within a database is a table. Well, that makes sense. I told you the database would be a collection of these tables, right? Um, and so a table is where all of our data information is stored. So that's pretty standard. So you can enter data in each one of these fields based off of the record, so the collection of it that you have. So for instance, each record here, or each row, you can think of the row as your records. Or data points was another term I used for you all, but records is what we call them in most database systems. Each record, or each row, each record has an MEID, a first name, a last name, a division, and then the department that that person runs. Um, and so if we take all of those pieces together, that's how we get a record, because all of these things relate to one another, right? When I look at the department, I look at who was in charge of it at the time in which this was created. I would say, okay, that was Mark Nilsson. And I look at the division, I could think of a lot of people that are in that division, but when I relate it to the department, it goes to Mark Nilsson. When I see the last name Nilsson, it goes to the first name Mark. When I go to the first name Mark, it tied to multiple people, as you can see, it tied to two different people. Um, but when I look at their MEID, they would be different. And so I mentioned all of those parts because sometimes people will say that, oh, you only need to know the department to decide who's the name that should go over here. Or, oh, you only need to know the last name to know, to uniquely identify, is what I'm really getting at, to uniquely identify which record I'm talking about. And that's not true, right? You probably can very easily see that sometimes, in some instances, some two people may be over a certain department. So now you won't be able to differentiate the record. Or in this case, they're all of these names are under the same division. And so how can you identify which one you're talking about? The last name could also all be different. They could be the same, right? First name, we see an obvious case right here of them being the same. But if we have something to uniquely identify them, such as the MEID, because no two people could have the same MEID, then that's different. And we're able to, right, we're able to uniquely identify each record based off of that. And so a table's main job is to just store the information, and keep it tidy. Well, that depends on the person that created it. And when I say tidy, that is an actual technical term that people use. And the purpose of things being tidy is literally, um, do the categories or the fields that are used make sense for each record? Is each record uniquely identified? Is there an easier way to store our data? For instance, what's used here, honestly, like there's this is a screenshot. There's more MEIDs, first name, last names, in different divisions as well. However, um, what might be a better way to store this might be actually, instead of having one large table with with all that information, why not have one table that has the different divisions in it, because those would be unique, and then from the divisions connect them to a separate table that has all the members that are in that division, right? That would make it tidier. So it's a way to tidy has to do with how things are organized within the database. And you want things to be very simple and easy because it can change how you can analyze your data. And the example I just gave is probably the only, at this point in time, what the way I'm thinking, probably the only way I can make this tidier would be to take out the division, because it's the same for everyone that you see listed here, and there are distinct groups. So there's no reason to use that over and over again when I can just make another table that has those divisions and then link that to this table. Okay. So are there any questions about tables? Okay. So the main thing to get from this is that each of these categories or the columns is called a field. Each one of these rows or data points is a record, and it's called a record. If we have a collection of records, that's how we get a table. When we have a collection of records. Okay. So technically, you could have one record and that be a table, right? Because that's still a collection of records. It just has only one. Uh, and technically, you could have only one table and it be a database, right? Because that's still a collection of tables. It just happens to be just one of them. So don't think collection means you have to have more than one in order for it to work. Collection just is exactly what it says. It's a collection. I know that confuses people sometimes. They think they have to have two things in order to have their table, which you don't. Okay, the second object is known as a query. And so the purpose of this is to search and filter, or I don't really like to say filtering. Search just sounds better, but you can use it in a way to kind of filter. but it's to search and display specific data from the database. And this is used usually in analysis or to answer a quick question. And so it goes through stuff that you see in a table, and it may do certain calculations even, and then it will display some results. So for instance, in the table up here, we had MEIDs, first names, last name, divisions, and departments. Well, for some reason or whatever, for some reason, what I want to do is actually I just want to know what the departments are, and then the first and last name of the people in charge of those departments. And that's all I want to know. And I'm going to make this on easy display for students. And so what I'm going to do is I'm also going to list these departments in alphabetical order. So what I did was I did a query, in which case I was able to, I was able to select certain fields to display, and then I was able even to change the order or sort one of the fields. And in doing so, it automatically sorted the others because these records are, these the data is connected to each other because they're in the same record. Okay. So this is, you can think of this as, oh, well, why don't you just make a copy of this and delete MEID for MEID in division, and then just drag over this column in front of this one, because then I would be manipulating the table. This allows me to keep the table the same with all that data that is connected and could be needed possibly in the future, and um, very quickly answer a issue or a question that may come up. Like, hey, who runs what department? I can print that out super easily. Do a query, print this out, and I'm done. And everyone can easily see which department they are. They see in alphabetical order, so it's easier on the eyes. And then they see first name and last name. Another thing you can do with the query, I said you can do calculations. You can do calculations to do certain selections. Like, let's just say, I know there was the amount of funding that each department had was here too. Maybe I only want to list the funding that was over $50,000. And I could do that as well by doing a calculation. It still would be a selection query because it's selecting data based off of what you want to see. But there's also queries known as action queries. And what action query is, it does a query and then will do a certain action afterwards and make some kind of change or creation. And so in this instance, I took the data that was in that table and I actually created a new field, so to speak, but it's only in the query. So this new field is email address. Well, how did I create the email address? Oh, well, I just took the first name, I concatenated with it a period, and then I concatenated the last name, and then concatenated at southmountncc.edu, and that's it. So I very easily and quickly created this this field based off of previous information. Okay. Well, why didn't you just put that on the table? Because to be perfectly honest with you, it was not necessary. Why is it not necessary? Because all of the data to create this comes from stuff that's already in the table. There's no reason to put this email address in the table because the information that creates it is already found in the table. So doing a query to say, hey, I want to know the department, the first name and last name of the people in charge of the department, and then their email address. Instead of me having a table that has information, I can use a query to just create that last bit for me, for myself. Okay, and this is actually tidier. So if you were in charge of data and you had email addresses such as these listed, like with the rest of your stuff in your table, the person over you will probably tell you that's a waste of space. Because you got to think about it this way too. Every time you add something to this, what happens? Every time something's added, it takes up memory. It takes up space. So in your eyes, it's like, oh, well, that doesn't really matter. There's not much on here, right? Which is true. But in the eyes of a much larger company, why would you use this at all, right? Because all of this comes from here. It's the same thing as I said earlier. Like I could actually make this tidier by getting rid of the division and just making a separate table that links out to, hey, MCL, CTL goes to these people with these IDs in these departments. Then having this in here, because this takes up space where I can have it listed one time and only once. Okay. Any questions about queries?
So are we gonna have to do all this for an assignment?
You will. We're gonna take our time with it. So the only other time we have for this week is pretty much a quiz just over these basics. Next week we will create tables, and we'll build relationships between the tables, and then we'll also have queries. Oh, the week after that we'll create a query, and then we'll create the other two things that we're about to talk about as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So we're just doing a quiz this week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, let me rephrase it. A quiz is due at the end of this week. You could go ahead and get started on your stuff for next week, if you would like to. After you get done with the quiz, and this could give you a good leeway on how to get started. Okay. All right. So the third object that we'll be creating are forms. And so what a form is honestly exactly what you're used to a form being. And so what this does is allows for the developer to create a front end access point for any user, so that the user can go in and fill out information with ease, right? And so forms can get as creative as you want. For example, the MEID part could automatically fill in on its own by checking the first three letters of the first name and then putting the appropriate number at the end. So Mark Nielsen was the first one to come up and fill out the form. He got MAR and then some zeros and then a 1. Mark Larry came up next. He got MAR, some zeros and a 2. Then when Maria came up, she got MAR as well, and she got zeros and a 3. And so each time that new person came to fill it out, it can automatically give them an MEID based on how we set up the form. And all I do is pretty much can take those first three letters, like I said, and then go check this. Oh, does this one exist already? Does this one exist already? Then we'll do the third option. So they could just be entering first name and last name, division, and then department. We could have another field up here that has email address that automatically then will display to them their email address based off their first and last name entered. And you all have seen forms throughout your life. You filled out forms online. So you fill out a form, probably you might even fill out an application in order to enroll in this college. That was just an online form. Some of you may have come to the school and signed up, but you probably did it online regardless. So you've seen this before. And so everything you enter in this form would then go to our table in the background. Okay. So the last thing is a report. And so what a report does, it allows us to very easily and concisely present our data to be read, and understood, and analyzed. And so you can do a report on a whole table. You can do a report on just a query if you want. So it's just, again, an easy way for us to summarize, giving clear and concise, easy to understand analysis and a report on what we found or what our data says. And so these can be very helpful. So here's our report. All right, so those are the 4 objects. So again, we have a table, which is our collection of records, which is a collection of data and information given. We have our query, which is our way of searching and displaying certain data based off of what we're looking for. We have our form, which allows us on the front end to allow the user to enter information and collect that information to be put on a table on the back end. And then we have reports that allow us to present our data in a clear and concise way that can be used for analysis. So then you have a quiz over these database basics. Had 7 questions in regards to, sorry, I had 7 questions in regards to the basis of a database. So just links to go back through those uh, questions, go back to those sections if you need to. So a collection of related data that is stored in a computer system can be organized, filtered, modified, and analyzed. It's called a link. So careful with that. Oh, I mean to do that. Okay, well, anyway, I guess you get one of them. So a collection of records, collection of all records is called a what? The rows of a table are called what? The columns of a table are called what? The field that uniquely identifies the record. Oh, okay, I need to make sure I talk about that. So whenever you create a record, a new record, I mentioned how the MEID, for instance, would be unique for each record on that table. That's why it was important to use and not just have, oh, well, the last name can tell me who it is. Well, what if 2 people have the same last name? Oh, the first name and last name can tell me what it is. What if 2 people have the same first name and last name? You know, there's no way with that data to or information to uniquely identify each record. So sometimes you have to create something that will uniquely identify each record. And whether you create something or you actually have something you can use, such as an MEID or a social security number or a license number, um, if you have to create it or you can use something, regardless, it's called a primary key because it primarily identifies that record uniquely. Okay, so I just gave you that one too. That's primary key. And a database can only contain one table, true or false. A database can be composed of 4 different objects. Tables, queries, forms, and reports match each of these objects with the appropriate description. So we have used for storing the data. We have used to search the database and retrieve specific data. We have typically used for entering data through a more user-friendly interface, and we have used for analyzing and presenting data. Those are the 4 options you have. So one of these is a table, one of these is a query, one of these is a form, and one of these is a report. All right. Any questions about databases? Do we include the quiz in our portfolio? Um, you can talk about it if you would like to. So, so yes, you can. Remember, the e-portfolio is for you to discuss on the things that you have learned in this class that were taught about in this class, what you learned or what you felt wasn't that you or you felt that you did not learn, what you felt was helpful, what you felt was not. So it's yours to use how you would like in regards to meeting the requirements for the rubric. It's that you hit all of the competencies, and then there's some little objectives in regards to using presentation software. But we're gonna do a lot of things within a database. So if you want to specifically mention the quiz and the going over the basics, what you found helpful or not helpful with that, you can. But we also have the next 2 weeks to do things with it as well. So yeah, how you want to do that is up to you. Does that answer your question? You are welcome. All right. Well, and so normally I would continue on to week 10 so some of you can get a head start on your table, but um, if no one has any other questions, I will actually leave that up to you all to get started with. After you finish your quiz, I'm sure some of you probably just finished it now, to be honest. But my headache is not subsiding, so I'm gonna call this a class unless anyone has any other questions in regards to anything we've done so far. Yes, the quiz will just be a review of the databases. So honestly, if you go back through, database 101, database 101 continued, and database objects, you have more than enough to 100% this quiz. Also from just rewatching this lecture today. In regards to info about the midterm, as I mentioned, I think it was like week 2, there is no midterm final exam for the course. I'm a project-based kind of learner, so I felt that the projects would be more beneficial than giving you guys a midterm, in which case I probably would say, hey, you have an hour to do these things in Word and Excel, where and then answer these other questions on top of that. I'm like, that doesn't seem really fair to me. So yeah. Oh, you're welcome. That's just how I am personally. So I'm not gonna make other people do that if I think that that's not fair. So that's just my opinion too. Uh, there's research to back me up, but research is just a statistical analysis. So I'm sure there's research on the other side of that too. You know how you word the question that you want to know and that you want to know the answer to. Yeah, I think so too. And we thank you for that. Yeah. I'm sure you guys have plenty of midterms. Some of you probably have already just finished yours because we just reached the midway point. So and some of you may be starting new 8-week classes. So you might be under a little more stress. So yeah. In my mind, this week's assignments should not take long to do. So I would say do them and make sure things are good to go with them. That way you can ask any questions you may have. It seemed at the beginning of class there were still some questions about the pivot table and pivot chart and maybe some slight confusion. So I would make sure that's all good to go. And the database basics, just read through those questions carefully. I just went through them. No one asked any questions after that. I did make a mistake and not do. Oh, cool. I made a mistake and didn't mention the primary key, but I just did. So the primary key again is what you use to uniquely identify each record. Um, so in my mind, what happens over these weeks when we look at databases either takes students like 30 minutes to do, or it takes them like 9 hours. And it all depends, in my mind, the way I've seen it is always dependent on understanding. So I say that not as a scare tactic because it shouldn't be. I never want to scare anyone because this stuff can be, this stuff is simple. But simple does not mean necessarily easy. Because the reason why people were able to get it done in 30 minutes is because they took their time to plan ahead. Remember, I'm talking about what I mentioned since the beginning about the programming development cycle, how you can use it throughout life, but you first understand a problem, see what it is you want, like what is the task that you're trying to complete, and then you plan it out, and then you begin to actually execute it. And then you go back and look for, okay, what kind of mistakes happen or what could have gone wrong, and then you finalize and you're done. when it comes to working with these databases, the same thing. You want to design, or sorry, before you even get to design, you want to understand what is it that you really want to do. So when we talk about a table, and I tell you all to, because like I told you, all these projects are going to be more personal for you to get creative. And I tell you to make a table and it has to have at least 5 different categories or 5 fields on it. And you need at least 10 records. It's not a good idea to wait till November 1st, 10 o'clock saying, okay, let me just pick something random. And then you realize you run into trouble because your database keeps saying that there's an error or it can't be created or you can't do stuff because you didn't plan it out after you decided what you want to do. Or you didn't even decide, you just start thinking you would just type things. That's where people mess up with this stuff and where it ends up taking them 9 hours to complete. So as we're going through this, please ask questions. Yes.
So will more of the like the assignments have the videos that you usually upload to like walk us through it? Because I feel like that's really helpful too.
They will. The database one's audio kicked out. I do have other videos that I will attach with it, and then we'll have the ones from the lecture too. But yes, they will be there. Mm-hmm. And thank you for telling me that you find those helpful, because I usually don't get any feedback from those, except for a random person from another country will comment on the YouTube video or something. So thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay. So that'll be the next couple of weeks. The next 3 weeks we'll be looking at Microsoft Access. We'll really dive into it. So yeah, and please ask questions when we're going through it, please, as we do each part. Don't get so worked up on the due date either, because these literally build on each other. You create your tables, we'll create 2 of them. Then we'll create a relationship between them. Then we'll do a query on them and get something. Then we'll create a form that we can use to enter in new data and make modifications to old data. And then we'll create a report and then get some kind of analysis of it. That's what we're going to be doing over the next 3 weeks. And again, like I said, I've seen people do this whole thing in 30 minutes. Their assignments. And then I'm not even talking about like, oh, this took 30 minutes and this took 30 minutes. I'm literally meaning that they did all 3 weeks worth of things in 30 minutes. So it all just depends on how much detail, how much time you take beforehand, making sure you completely understand what it is you want to do and doing it. So, okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. In that case, thank you all for coming today. Thank you for your kind words. And I will see you all on Monday.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend. Hope you feel better.
Thank you.